Also with basic spiritual concepts. From the time a child is about 5 years old, they're taught astral projection. For those who are unfamiliar with that, there's a part of you, a very conscious part of you, that is able to leave the body at small periods of time consciously. When this part is projected, you might say the astral body, soul travel, the more evolved, the farther you can go. And the child is taught that they can visit the akashas, are taught that they can visit different places on the planet. What this also creates is a chance for the child to explore and to understand for themselves. The children don't have to go through the period of having to always take someone else's word for it. They're able to get out and see the astral themselves. They're able to get out and see the etheric records themselves. A lot of them are able to get into the etheric retreats consciously and study that way. Many are able to get to the other subterranean cities or to spend time in surface cities, all through the etheric travels, astral travels. But as I said, in essence, and the child is able to learn for themselves the truth of how the world truly operates, the truth about what is really happening on the planet. Their way, they are never at a victim. They can not be led astray. They can't be told that something's right when nothing in the cosmos supports it. They can always go and feel the rightness for themselves. Thus you end up with a society of people that are not constantly left in the dark, and that you are basically not able to trick them on, because they've seen what's out there. They know what's real and what isn't. They know the capabilities of the human being. They know, for instance, ascension is real. They know, for instance, the existence of those on other planets. They understand how the etheric works. They've seen angels physically. So all these things that so many people have had to live on with faith, true, I'm saying we also develop faith. Faith to master yourself. Faith to live in the unseen, calling it the seen until it becomes the seen. In other words, able to manifest from the inside out. And there is not so much confusion, even when people reach that age. It has been quite difficult for everyone, the teenage years. In the teenage years, in Telos, a child immediately joins, when they're 12, a group, what is called group. The group is all the other children their age, and they spend, usually from the years of 12 to the years of 18, 19, they spend much of their time with their group, working out all the problems among their peers that seem to always rear their head in the teenage years, no matter what society you're in. Yes, we still have teenage problems that happen. It can't help but happen. The emotional and mental bodies are developing. A child's body is full of hormones that's creating instability within the emotional realms. The mental body is growing stronger but causing confusion in the emotional body. All these little physical, psychological, spiritual elements that create that phase from childhood to adulthood. But we've learned to take it tongue-in-cheek. In essence, we call the teenage years the years of temporary insanity. And we don't make the children feel guilty for wanting to go and scream at the top of their lungs or wanting to do something they know they shouldn't do. We just accept it as the years of temporary insanity. They work out their frustrations within their group. They experiment with the elements of life within their group. Quite often they go down into the lower caverns and just run for days. All the things that they can get in so much trouble for doing unless it's put in an organized basis. Yet the basis has to be so unorganized within its organization that they have to feel that they're truly being allowed to express themselves, so that the frustration is brought up, dealt with, and then they move on. All children, no matter how good their parents, no matter how good their upbringing, will go through periods of rebellion at this point. All children will go through periods of not wanting to listen to what older people say. But by being allowed to work it out within themselves and with other children going through the same process, they are able to get an understanding that what they're doing doesn't make them a bad person. The feelings that are going through them uncontrolled doesn't make them bad, just makes them normal. And it makes it so much easier on the child and on the parents. Also, each of these groups are then assigned priests and priestesses who act somewhat as mentors, not to judge or act like parents, but to simply get the kids to sit down and talk about what's bothering them. Get them sit down and act out their frustrations in the form of plays, in the form of programs that have been put into the holographic theaters, in the form of music, in the form of athletics, or even in the form of going down into the subtunnels and just running for 3 days and acting like nuts. Everybody needs that. But when it's done in such a way that there's no judgment upon it, no stigma attached to it, then children do it, get through it, and come back normal, and do not need many of the crutches that severely emotional adults turn to. Many adults that did not deal with the frustrations that came up in their childhood or in their teenage years, that later turn to drugs, later turn to inappropriate forms of behavior, that later turn to irresponsibility, or later turn to perhaps even more damaging of I'm not good enough, depression, fear, unable to create anything out of their life because they don't feel like it's just not worth it, that they can't do anything right. But by creating a system where all these energies are dealt with, then adults come out feeling much more secure of themselves at the other end of their teenage years. And the second reason for that is in a society such as Telos and the other subterranean cities, people basically live as long as they choose. We should also understand, if you've got people living for thousands and thousands of years, you can't afford to have thousands and thousands of years old of adults that are acting irresponsible, adults that are playing detrimental games, adults that are pushing their will onto others. All the little things that happen simply because energies are not dealt with in a young child. Which brings us also to one of the major thoughts in an education of our own that we wish to see happen here, and that's the removal of the thought form of aging and dying. Human beings were not meant to age or die. Even people who work in genetics understand that a person, in truth, is never older than 7 years, since their whole body changes all its cells every 7 years. Many doctors on aging will admit that they are baffled as to why people age at all, since the body is never old. So he says, so then that takes it that we have to go to a level beyond the physical to find the answer to aging and death, to the belief the same thoughts are things. In Telos, people don't believe they're going to grow old and die. They simply don't believe it. People just know that they're going to live as long as they choose. Then they will either choose to drop their body if they feel that they still have lessons to do and reincarnate again, or they will choose the path of ascension, one or the other. Some people make the decision in 600 years, some 300, others wait for 5,000, 10,000, whatever. But it's a choice that the human beings were designed to be able to make. That is one of the most important elements of our culture that we want to see brought out. Human beings as it is now, just about the time they start getting enough experience to really do something with their life, they've grown too old to do anything with it. If those thoughts are eradicated, then people realizing their youth's not going to last 10 years or 20 years, but it's going to last hundreds or thousands of years, whatever they choose. That too brings out and eliminates the majority of the detrimental behavior in life. Many people feel I'm only going to live once, I'm only going to be young a short period of time, so I might as well wreak havoc now. If they realize that if they choose, they're going to be young for hundreds of years or thousands of years, that form of behavior becomes totally unnecessary, and people truly start growing and hanging on to their growth. And we are biologically absolutely no different than the people on the surface. We have Indian children that were left on the mountain of Shasta some hundreds of years ago. They're still living with us. They haven't grown old. They don't die because they were raised with the thought form that they're not going to. It's a thought that creates life or non-life, aging or youthing. Is to get past the thoughts, the beliefs that is what is going to happen. Which brings me to my personal expertise on the subject. I'm over 260 years old. As a matter of fact, I'm almost 268. And Living 268 years is no different than being, for instance, 30, aging-wise. It's just they've had time to gather a whole much more experience that can be used now. My parents, obviously, are much older. There are even people in Telos that are 30,000 years old. People who saw the destruction of Lemuria, Atlantis. People who saw the Lemurian-Atlantean wars. Which also brings us in to the next stage in a person's life. After they've gotten through their teenage years and they're ready to start becoming a contributing member of society, how do they choose what they're going to do? We have a non-monetary basis of commerce in Telos. As a person is growing up, they basically watch, decide, assess their own talents. Then they decide what they want to do. And that is usually the field they pursue. They've generally set their own hours. And since everything is on a barter basis, we've gotten to a great understanding that if you don't fulfill your part of the bargain, then it hurts others than just you. What is meant by that is we are set up on a basis that the government owns everything, but the government is not responsible for controlling anything. All the government is responsible is to make sure that the food, for instance, gets from the hydroponic gardens to the distribution outlets. The clothing makes it to the distribution outlets. That furniture, all the things that are needed for people to live and to live well. You understand that you're not living unless you're living well. And when you need something, you simply go to a distribution center and pick it up. You need new clothing, you go get clothing. You need food, you go get food. You need furnishings, you go get furnishings. You need books, you go get books. And as I said, everyone sets their own hours. Someone who is drawn to gardening becomes one of the hydroponic gardens. They come and they work the amount of hours they wish. So in essence, we do have a dim period and we have a bright period. What I mean by that is we've discovered that people work in cycles better than they do in a constant. So thus about the same time the sun is setting on the surface, filters are slid over the front of our lighting system, dimming it till it is about as dim as it is in twilight. Then when the sun would be rising, the filters start sliding back slowly, thus allowing it to get brighter and brighter. When we first moved into Telos, we experimented with leaving it bright all the time. And again, as I said, we found out that people function better in cycles. Some people like to sleep when it's dimmer and work when it's bright. Other people, like the night owls, that prefer to work or play when it's bright or when it's dim and sleep when it's bright. But everyone is allowed to function in the way that is the most comfortable to them. So everyone comes in and sets their own hours and simply informs, you might say, the foreman of whatever their job is, which hours they're going to be working over the next few day period. And everyone comes in and works basically as long as they wish. And then they go and they do whatever else they want to do. But understanding that since we're on a society that if you are too lazy to go work at all in the hydroponic gardens and that's your job, somebody might not have enough food. Or if you didn't feel like designing clothing or creating clothing or furniture, and you made no other arrangements for someone else to take up your slack of time, someone else in the city might be going without. So understanding that method is make people responsible for what hours they work. Understanding that they are doing true service that somebody will appreciate. The only thing that we don't interchange by simply putting in the distribution centers are things like art forms, art objects, massages, things like that. That is done in what we call a barter basis. Those who, for instance, their main talent is art, whether it's drawing, pottery, sculpturing, massage. All these different little things that are not part of the whole, not part of what you might say necessities, but are necessities to the soul. As I said, these come to the distribution centers in the form of the barter pool. In other words, you walk in and you see a statue that was created by somebody you really want. In exchange for it, you're willing to give 10 massages, and you're very good at massage. Or you're willing to come and sing Then the barter pool goes through it with the computers, and perhaps the person who made the statue doesn't need a massage, but a person who brought in a painting that the person who made the statue wants massages. So it continually, the barter pool switches and curves so that everyone's needs are met. So everyone can come in and exchange energy in some form to receive, you might say, the little pampering things in life. Also within this system, people setting their own hours, it does not become so crystallized that no one has any freedom to come and go at their will. That people can truly set their lives to achieve the best of work, of play, of rest, of meditation, spiritual endeavors, so that everything is met and not at the expense of something else. Understanding that spiritual time is just as important as work time. Which leads us to what could be a problem of what about those jobs that no one wants to do, since everyone chooses their jobs. Gathering the garbage and dematerializing it, weeding the hydroponic gardens, etc., etc. This falls under what is called community service, and everyone does it. Everyone in the city spends a certain amount of time a month in community service. So what this means is this works very well because since everyone does it, no one has to do it that much. No one has to do full-time the jobs that no one would like to do and go into resentment because of it. Instead, if everyone does a certain amount of community service, it means that you might only spend 4 hours of community service a month. And since it becomes a project that you only do once a month, it actually becomes fun. And when people are on groups of community service, they start singing and playing and having a good time. But it's something that no one even tries to get out of it. You can be in community service. A real good one is picking up, put it bluntly, secretions from the animals down in some of the nature areas where it starts getting really bad. This could put someone in real resentment while you're shoveling elephant you-know-what. But if the person in the hydroponic gardens is doing it right alongside of, for instance, someone on the Council of 12, it's a thing that becomes not resentful, but fun, and it's something that people truly get a sense that there is no better than and no less than in a job situation. That a farmer or someone who works in the hydroponic gardens is not less than someone who's on the Council of 12. They both just have different jobs, and both jobs are equally important for a city to run properly. So therefore, people immediately have the feeling of being good enough. And as I said, things like community service brings all the different levels of service together and creates a true camaraderie, which goes into perhaps one of the more interesting aspects too of our personal relationships. In Telos, we have two forms of marriage. We have a bond marriage and we have a sacred marriage. A bond marriage is when two beings decide that they've got something with each other and they want to explore it greater. Then in front of a priest or priestess and a bunch of their friends, they commit themselves to a bond marriage, which means that they're saying, we've got something, we realize we really care for each other, and we'd like to see where it's going. So in essence, it is a form of a marriage because it has the commitments for as long as you choose the bond marriage to last. And then if you decide, oh, well, it was just a passing thing, or it's something that's not going to work, you simply, stand in front of a priest or priestess again and simply explain that it didn't work. And there's no stigma on it. Some people can have several bond marriages at once. There's also no stigma on that. One thing that you do not do in a bond marriage is you do not have children. That is saved for a sacred marriage. In a sacred marriage is when you have decided, okay, we have something. Then you have a large marriage, usually a beautiful wedding. All your bond marriages are dissolved and you go into a sacred marriage where you are then allowed to have children. Children is something that people need to be trained for. that need to be taken as a serious responsibility. Some people might be in a bond marriage 200-300 years before they take a sacred marriage. Someone else who's with their soulmate or twin flame may go into a sacred marriage 2 months after they were in their bond marriage. It's all different. But again, it's always a matter of having choice. It's always a matter of having respect for each other. I am Sharula Dux. I am the daughter of the Ra and Ranamu, therefore Princess Sharula, and I thank you.